I know all of you, but anyway, formalities. My name is Rachael Sanguinetti. I am a senior here at Eastman with 2 degrees, a musical arts degree and a music education degree. This is my musical arts final presentation, though my music ed degree does kind of work its way in, and you'll see. So this quote I thought was just really interesting to start off. It's from a TED Talk that Ben Zander did a couple of years ago, I think. It's gotten millions and millions of views. And he basically presented classical music to an audience of 3,000 people, just average everyday Joes, and said, by the end of this presentation, you will love this piece. And he played a Chopin prelude. And he said, they say 3% of the population likes classical music. If we could only move it to 4%, our problems would be over, is what everybody else says. I say, how would you walk, how would you talk, how would you be if you thought 3% of the population likes classical music? How would you walk, how would you talk, how would you be if you thought everyone likes classical music, they just haven't found out about it yet? And here's a jolly picture of Ben Zander because he's smiling and he's happy. So classical music and this generation is the topic of my MUA. Final project presentation is a compilation of 2 years of a huge exploration for me. So where we are, where we should be going. Now, the MUA is definitely a journey, and I want to share a little bit of that with you. Something that Professor Steinberger said was, the idea you have at the beginning of the project is not usually where you end up, which is entirely true. I presented to the MUA committee at the end of my sophomore year. I said, I want to study music criticism and music journalism, and this has got influences of all that. My classwork was in journalism and media studies. I did 3 journalism classes and a media class, and they've all worked their way into this final thing that I have come up with. It was mostly a study of how we communicate and how we bring the word about classical music to everybody else in the world that hasn't heard about it yet. What is this project now? That's a really good question. I did a series of interviews, which I'll talk about a little bit later, compiled them all together, got a lot of really interesting perspectives and ideas from people. I'm fortunate enough to go to one of the greatest music schools in the world, and I have all these people at my disposal, as well as living in Rochester. I have more people at my disposal, so you will see all of that. Classical music is dying. Now, you're all musicians, and you're all music people, so you know this is not the case, but one of the first articles I read when I started my research, first line, classical music is dying, which was a little disheartening as a soon-to-be graduated musician. And I'm here to tell you it's not true, at least from where I'm standing and from what I've learned, but it's definitely changing, and it's a changing world, and that's the biggest thing that I've kind of pulled out of this whole project. So this is a quote from Kathleen Davis, who writes for the Michigan Daily. She says, like many young adults my age, she's about my age, I do not mention classical music when I'm asked what kind of music I like, or what my favorite songs are. It's a genre that for me has fallen to the wayside, discarded amongst wrapped mint candies, dentures, and the geriatric. Which I thought was just kind of like a kicker. Yeah. Because, I mean, I identify with this. When somebody asks me what kind of music I like, I don't necessarily say classical music as my first thing. So what you will be seeing in the video presentation are all of these wonderful people who gave me some of their time to talk about the subject of millennials and classical music, and I compiled hours and hours and hours of interviews into approximately 38 minutes and 40 seconds. So how these interviews came to be, like I said, Professor Vandermark and Professor Steinberger and I and other people in the community had conversations about who would be an interesting person to talk to, who is kind of a leader in this field, who has very strong ideas about this topic. And I emailed all these people and said, hey, will you give me 20 minutes of your time? Everybody responded and said, yes, of course, I'm really passionate about this. Everybody I talked to, the interview lasted 45 minutes to an hour. And probably would have gone longer if I hadn't been like, okay, you've got to go back to work now. But it was just a really riveting conversation with everybody I got to talk to. So after that, I rewatched the interviews, I edited, I chopped, I cut them, and compressed everything.
Everyone wants to know what the future of classical music is. And to be honest, I don't think anybody really knows. I personally feel like classical music will always be there. I don't know exactly what people will think of it, and I don't even think it's possible for any one person to control what people think of it. But if if we keep making it available in interesting and relevant ways, then I do have a belief that classical music is of such substance that it will exist. It might not be, the thing that, people sit down with a beer with and watch on Saturday afternoons on TV. I don't have any illusions that might be. Although if there was a way that it happened, that would be great.
Cool.
But I think if there are talented and passionate and creative musicians out there making it available and relevant, then I think there will be a place for it.
I think that the whole issue is multi-layered, complex. I don't believe there is one single answer. It has to be addressed probably in a different way by every institution, by every music director, by every musician.
I think most of us who are musicians would agree that Beethoven and Mahler and Schubert and Tchaikovsky, whatever, did not all of a sudden become bad composers. Like, there's nothing wrong with the product. The delivery system may need to be tweaked, but there's nothing wrong with the product.
And that for me is, I think, one of the biggest things about classical music. The reason why it's perhaps not very attractive to young people is because the way we present it is not ways people want.
So we don't need to make a case for the music itself. The music speaks for itself, just because it was created by humans and because we're humans.
Easy enough.
So it's the packaging that we need to fix.
Can you all sing it together with me? Ready, sing, hot cross buns, hot cross buns. 1 a penny, 2 a penny, hot cross buns. Good job.
I mean, what you're achieving by bringing art, to those kids, what you're offering them is just the possibility. You're allowing them to imagine a whole other future for themselves. I mean, they ultimately are probably the best served to dig themselves out of that, but they need to know what it is. They need to have a vision. And I think art can certainly be, part of that. It can be part of the inspiration, part of the kind of a personal awakening.
We're not, the difference between the old days where there was a dearth of young people and today where there may be a dearth of young people is that we don't have the music education programs in the schools to rely on, right? So before, it was like, yeah, I played in band, and yeah, I played in the pit, for my high school musical, and yeah, I didn't play my instrument for 20, 25 years, but yeah, I remember having a great time with music, and I'm enjoying going to these concerts again. And now there's a generation of people that some of whom have not had that experience. So how do you connect with them, and that's the $64 million question is to how best to do that.
My fear is that we've devalued music in the education system, which is going to devalue it when they become retired. You look at music programs, and when things start getting cut and things start getting, devalued is what I say. Then all of a sudden, people aren't going to do that. They're going to go to what they value. What do they value? Well, maybe they'll go to the Airmarks, or maybe they'll go to the movies, or maybe they'll go see golf, because it's what they can relate and value. And when we lose that to relate and value, it's a major, major challenge. And by the time you hit the millennial generation, you're trying to band-aid a dike.
The whole issue of attracting millennials, I think it all comes back to music education too, and having music educators that educate people not just to play at a really high level, because that's a thing, and then teachers are able to do amazing things, but to teach towards those students that aren't going to be musicians, but to cultivate music appreciators. I love it when I talk to people that don't play an instrument but can critique a concert, because they know enough about it and they know what they like and they know what they don't like.
a poor teacher or group of teachers is not going to make all the difference. And similarly with music, so there has to be a support mechanism not only in the schools, but in the best case scenario, it would be in school, and it would be something that would be fostered at home.
Classical music has to really be investing in education. It needs to be investing in the younger, really, music education in this. There needs to be investment on the political side, on the government side, on the community side, on the whole aspect, so that it's on the same level as teaching math, teaching English.
The balance of long-term and short-term goal setting, people don't want to do things that are difficult, and like picking up an instrument for the first time is incredibly difficult. So how do we convince people, how do you ingrain this fact that like good things take time and you have to be patient, because you will master this instrument. It's just going to take 10-15 years of 2 hours of practice every day. Yeah.
So the way I kind of broke this up is I took all of these interviews and looked for some really major themes that kind of ran through all of them, both from the questions I was asking them and also things that they just brought up and talked about that were really important. So you'll see chunks of video and then I'll talk for a little bit, and there'll be chunks of video and I'll talk for a little bit. The other thing I want to tell you is you can see the progression of my skills as a videographer as it goes along. And you'll also see that 2 of them are just audio interviews that I did at Java's, which was back in October before I had any idea what in the world I was doing. But they both were, Will and Roman were both really fantastic interviews, so I said I can't just not use these. So please, I apologize for my poor audio and video skills. So the first thing we talked about was music education. I didn't expect music education to come into this project. That's my other life, but it did. You saw the video of me teaching. Those are my kindergartners at school number 4, my first student teaching placement, and they're so cute. So music education, I did some research. This is from the National Endowment of the Arts, and it's very happy and uplifting, and it looks pretty good. Comparing in 2000 to 2010, the percentage of schools that have music programs is basically what this is doing. And you see 94%. That's not bad. And comparing to 2010, still 94%. So we don't see that decline in music programs that we keep hearing about. Music programs keep getting cut. So I saw this and I was like, yeah, music ed, we're good, we're ready to go. And then I read an NPR review of this study, and NPR was like, wait a second, that's not quite right. So they said, if you look deeper into the report on page 156 or something, like really deep into it, 81% of secondary schools with enrollment under 500 have music programs. So it's the bigger schools that have programs, but the majority of schools who are smaller don't have, a lot of the schools don't have programs. And 20%, that's a lot of schools without programs. So in 2000, 100% of the high poverty schools had programs, but in 2010, only 81% of the schools had programs, and it's probably continued to decline since then. We hear from elementary school music specialists, teachers. You can see all the statistics about their support for their programs, and it's really not a lot of support coming from the school, coming from the board of directors for the school, anything like that. So there is a decline in music programs. We just didn't see it in that initial graph. So what now? As musicians, as arts advocates, as a person entering the field, we need to continue to support these programs. We need to be an advocate, always pushing for these education programs, talking about how important they are and why they're important, and finding ways to bring students to performances and bringing performances to students. While I was at school number 4, I brought a group of 4th graders to see the RPO, and I'm sure they will never forget that day at the RPO. They were so excited. They got to see, the first trombone player, that's my friend Mr. Kellogg. He's a really cool guy. And then to point it on the stage, it was awesome. They loved it. So yeah, just continuing to find ways to connect students with programs and programs to students.
The main thing is that we can't lose we can't lose the message of the greatness of of the music, and we can't let our culture strip away the greatness of that. But we can use that to get more people involved, but to come to the restaurant, but we still got to serve the same great food.
I find that to get the crowds in, what symphony orchestras do with some success is to program the blockbusters of yesteryear over and over again, and they're great. I love them. And if one keeps hiring the next 23-year-old, or maybe even an 18-year-old, or 15-year-old wunderkind to play said warhorse of yesteryear, you're going to get a crowd of some kind. On the flip side, many orchestras find that the way to bring in the crowd will in fact be endless programming of recycled Beatles tributes and on and on and on. And I love pop music to no end. I just die when I hear that recycled stuff. I think it's just hideous. And I think it does a short and long-term disservice to what could be a creative event, and to the musicians, and to everybody involved. And I think it does us no favors at all.
But the problem is then getting those people who kind of tunnel their way into the RPO to make the tunnel a little bigger.
Mm-hmm.
So, man, I really want to go to the RPO because I want to hear Audra McDonald. So they come and they hear Audra McDonald, and you look at the Facebook post, wow, best concert I've ever been to. The RPO sounded great. So, do you want to come hear Mahler 5? Nah. What I don't think most orchestras have found yet, and I could be wrong about that, is how to get their pops clientele interested in classical, how to get the classical clientele interested in pops, or in special events, or ballet, or opera, or other things that the same group of musicians are doing. We have to have many inroads with the hope that maybe every once in a while they'll intersect enough that someone will want to come back and hear something that's maybe outside their comfort zone at least a little bit.
These organizations are faced with some financial peril, and the notion of bringing in a lot of people to hear new things is kind of scary. And I think the perception of some in the changing cultural landscape is that by latching onto the more common denominator of pop, they'll be able to expand in some ways. It's fallacious. I think at best they'll be able to make a few bucks. I mean, an ABBA tribute concert is not going to bring people in to hear, Le Sac du Printemps. Well, maybe, who knows.
Like, I went to my first pop music concert, and it's, everyone goes and gets drinks and then stands around with their phones Instagramming everything, and they have the time of their lives. And I'm not saying that we should be doing that with classical music, but serve a drink before the concert. That's not wine in a paper glass,
right?
I think making it a social experience and a concert, and not just a concert. I actually talked to Renee Jolas one time about Orpheus Chamber Orchestra, and I said, how do you attract your audiences? And she said, we play good music. And I think the artistic standard absolutely cannot be sacrificed. And you don't want to make yourselves look desperate. We're just going to play the Toy Story soundtrack so people come to the concerts. And, you want to, you want to do something that allows your musicians to play with integrity and let them do something that they're proud of. So I think it's okay to do film scores and to do pop music, but make it something that's intellectually stimulating for the performers and the audience.
So pop concerts, I looked high and low for research that showed the correlation between the number of people who come to Pops concerts and those that return to come to classical concerts. And there really hasn't been a lot of research done comparing the two. So my next slide, I'd love to do a comparison of all of that and see if there's any correlation. But everybody I talked to said there really isn't a correlation. People who come to see ABBA tribute concerts and people who come to see Beethoven. If you get 2,000 people coming to see this tribute concert, most of them don't come back to see the concert the next week. Somebody I talked to said, let that be because Pops concerts are lovely and they're great, people like them. Don't expect them to have a correlation to the next thing. And keep the musical integrity. Don't make your musicians play Beatles concerts and ABBA tribute concerts all the time. Let them play the stuff that they went to school to learn and that they love to play.
And if you go back, I remember reading an article from the 1950s from the San Francisco Inquirer about how they were the writer of this article. So this is 60 years ago. Was worried because the graying of concert audiences. And gee, who's going to be the next generation in the concert hall?
I firmly believe that from kindergarten through high school and into the early college years is when you need to be developing the value and developing that connection. And then you're going to lose the audience. They're just going to go away. It's going to happen. It's been pretty much characteristic all through the ages, but they come back if they value it. People have been crying about the graying of the audience for about 100 years. Mm-hmm. And unless people are actually the longevity of that gray audience, we're now in the 200-year-old people.
Right.
We're not. What's happening is the audience, as people retire, they have time and they have money. And those are the two important things for a concert experience. I love the graying of audiences. What I'm afraid of is when we lose that graying of the audience. Mm-hmm. That's my biggest fear. But if I look out to my concerts and it's full of people that are enjoying it, that have gray hair, I'm happy.
They're there.
They're there. And you know what it means? It means when you get gray hair, you're going to be in my audience too.
And I don't think you should be afraid of making it complex and making it, again, very intellectually stimulating. We don't have to, I hate when, there's nothing about it that needs to be dumbed down.
So the aging of the audience was a question that I specifically asked people and said, are you concerned about this? We've been talking about this for a really long time, and people keep complaining about it. I read an article that was written about 100 years ago that said audiences are aging and we really need to do something about this. So I know it's been happening for a while. But this was interesting data that I found. So 1937, the average age of the concert goer was 28 years old. 82 was suddenly 40 years old. And 2008, the most recent data I could find, they were 49 years old. And I'm sure they've probably crept up a little bit since then. The percentage of concert goers under 30 has declined by quite a bit since 2002, I'm sure, but 82 to 2002 is the data that I have. Now we have to take in the cultural changes that have happened and how it's not quite as cool anymore to go to the orchestra, but that's something we talked about a lot. So what now? We have to talk about and continue programs that bring these young people into the concert experience, and we'll talk about that in a different section a little bit later. Finding ways to engage them and make them want to come. And older people are okay too. We want them to come. As Keith said, we do want them to continue to come as well. So making them feel welcome while we also make the young people feel welcome at these concerts.
Celebrate, celebrate, come to the music. Celebrate, celebrate, come to us. Celebrate, celebrate, sing hallelujah. Celebrate, celebrate, clap your hands.
If we're honest with ourselves, if you're playing a classical event on Saturday night, one of your viable competitors is Netflix and a glass of wine.
Yes.
So you have to take your event and make it. I hate people say oh, it's all about accessibility, because it is accessible we need to stop saying that, because there's so many organizations that are taking these initiatives, and at any given time, like, you know, you can go online, look up a concert. It's not like you can't get to it. It's accessible. That's off the table. It's just a matter of making it comfortable.
And it's basically just bringing music to people where they are, like meeting them, not expecting them to come to you.
I think anything that makes for a connection is important. It's of course most important to be able to do it during the performance, but anything that can preface that is great, and anything that allows people to have a more common interaction rather than performer-audience following the show is very good. It gives an element of humanity to whomever the audience has seen, and that can translate into we don't know what.
And it's a lot of that people realizing that musicians are also humans. Like, we get tired, we like to eat, we like to drink, we like to talk about what we watch on TV or like about other things. People think that we're just like in this la la land and that we have no problems, that we're like in a fantasy world. No, we live in this same world. Like, we're
here. Yeah.
What about during intermission? That's what I say, is like send them out during intermission, because if you, like, I go to RPO concerts and I watch, and some of these musicians get out of the door faster than I can ever, like, it's faster than Eastman kids get out of orchestra rehearsal. And so I think, you know, you can't like stick a name badge on somebody and force them to go interact with people. That's really awkward. I think you have to cultivate ways for that type of interaction to happen organically. It should be an invitation to socialize, not, you can't require people to do that kind of stuff. It's like, you know, awkward get to know you game.
I think people will always need it, no matter how much time we spend on social media. I think it won't be replaced. I think what we're talking about is we sort of thought that it would replace some things. It really hasn't. It's just another device for things that, it's an information exchange. It's not necessarily a human emotional connection unless one is using it to write or to speak. But I think that when connected with a live performance, something before, something after, perhaps then a social media follow-up. It just makes it more complete.
I think people expect that more. Our society is just less formal than it was, you know, my parents' generation.
Right.
And people expect to be able to see things, know things about people, you know, and you can, thanks to the internet. You can find a lot about people, too much sometimes.
Yeah.
So I think people do enjoy that closeness, which makes this idea of communication all the more important.
Mm-hmm.
So anyone that thinks they can just get up and play a concert and not want to interact with the audience is, I think, living in the wrong decade or century, maybe. And I think that is an important aspect of a live performance that you don't get, like, if you're just behind a computer screen, is that sort of human quality, that sort of intimacy and personal quality. So the more one can cultivate that at a live event, I think that's very, I think it's something that people enjoy and maybe even crave in this day and age. Because that's one thing, that's what you always hear about technology. It's amazing, but it's fragmenting society. People don't gather to be together anymore. They don't take the time to know each other, to really know each other, you know. So if that is in fact true about us humans, that we still need that, then I think all the more reason that performing arts should be creating that opportunity for them.
How do they connect? How, you know, maybe it is on social media. You do it that way, where you're saying you're coming to tonight's concert, boom, here's this, or listen to this podcast that I'm sending you, sent it a couple days early. We're so excited you're coming. Boom. See, that's not cutting into the art. That's helping educate so that when they attend, they know what they're experiencing.
There's a wealth of music. So it's really, the key is just getting people to come and for at least a moment make them forget about that stereotype they have, and like just to try it. And get them to come because it's fun, because it's a party, because you'll be social.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like the hook. But then people realize, whoa, this is amazing. Like, this made me feel things that I never felt before. I want to come back. They just realize that it's not about age, it's not about class, it's not about anything really. It's just get together to experience art, to experience human expression, and build community.
I certainly know of many people who've come back not just because of what they heard from so-and-so playing or singing, but also because they had an opportunity to hear someone speak, to shake someone's hand, to get an autograph.
The first two interviews that you saw, Bridget and Sergio. Bridget does a lot of classical music stuff, and she talked about being very accessible. Sergio does group muse, which we'll talk about a little bit later. It's a fantastic program that brings music to people's living rooms. So very different ideas there, but the whole piece was about making those connections with the musicians. Now, we have to talk about this at some point, so I thought I'd put it here. The Health Report on Orchestra, classical music scene. So this is album sales for just classical CDs. It was up 5% in 2013, but we went down 21% in 2012, so we're not looking so good. But there was a huge loss of classical music radio stations in 2013 as well. This is a really interesting quote from a guy in Idaho who had a classical music station, his big multi-station place, and he said, it's just one of those things, classical radio is just one of those things that's slowly going away. Sure. Audiences are declining, we've seen that. Percentage of adults attending is also going down. I love this graph, well, I don't love it, but it's a good visual, of the audience decline from 85 to 2005, and it's continued to decline since then. So we know that people aren't really coming. We haven't really figured out ways to make them come, and one of the biggest things I really learned from talking to all these musicians is that people come for that connection that they have with people and with the musicians. And one of the things I asked was, how do you as a musician, make connections with your audience, and that's what makes them come back. Greg Sando is a writer, he has a blog, he's writing a book about classical music and the problems it has with our culture and generation. And this was a review that he wrote of Bob Flanagan's book about the economics of the orchestra. And he said, changes in audience behavior are climate, not weather, which I thought was a really interesting way to put it. Must be dealt with as such. The public is attending classical music concerts less frequently, and those who do attend are purchasing smaller ticket packages. And this is a direct quote from Bob's book. The decline in attendance at classical music concerts may reflect broad social shifts in the use of this leisure time that have little to do with the orchestra policies. Something to think about. But I'm still under the opinion that we can still make people come with those connections that we have with our audience members as musicians. So like I was saying, performers have to find ways to make connections, make it fun, make it social, make it a good time, and create the clan is something that Keith from the concert office, that you have to have your clan of people that you get to come every single time, and that they feel like they're a part of something, and that's what makes them come back.
We're trying to bring in a younger audience. It's a challenge, I will say that. It's a challenge even to get the students here to go to concerts.
I can't be a millennium person. I don't need to be persuaded to go and listen to a Bach piece.
Right.
So I don't, so it's hard for me to know what that would be like. But I do know I don't like going to concerts and dressing up in a tux. And I do like the idea of the music in other spaces than a big concert hall.
Right.
Our students are great. I think that they have a better idea of what they what they want. I really do believe that there are a lot of cultural trends that go like this, and I would hate for us to react too far one direction just to see, you know, another 8 or 10 years down the road, you know, things change again, and then we have to react, and then we, you know, so, you know, it's great for us to kind of hold on to our values, not in a stodgy way, but in a way that we, you know, offer people more choice. Choice is a big thing in our culture, like, as we just talked about with Eastman students. I think generally people want to have more choice. They don't want to be told what to do.
When I go to when we're playing concerts, I see so many people reading their programs or on their phones, so what's wrong with this picture? Well. And then I start looking at demographics. Who's doing it and who's not doing it. The Q-tip heads, like I call them because I am one, don't. The younger generation does.
And then they realize that the stereotype that we have of classical music, tuxedos, sit quietly, for 2 hours. We don't tell you what's happening next. We don't tell you how long you have to sit there. You have a vague idea. You can't eat. You can't move. That's not life.
You know, Mahler wrote, you know, an hour and 35-minute symphony, and people just sat and listened to it, and they bathed in it. They enjoyed it. You know, it was great. You know, and now we're like, okay, where's the microwave oven? You know, very seldom do you see someone not doing at least one thing at a time, if not 2 or 3. You know, so I remember when I lived in San Francisco. You know, someone's, you know, you're in heavy traffic and someone's putting their makeup, eating breakfast, and changing the radio at the same time. You know, but we're a culture of multitaskers, of course. In fact, very seldom do you ever find yourself just walking in the main hall and seeing someone and being able to really one-on-one connect with them, because they're either doing this as they're walking, or they're listening to music and they're kind of in their own little cloistered world, which is fine, you know, but it doesn't make for a real intimacy of connection between people.
So the millennial concept and that thought about how the millennials, which we'll talk about here, who are these young people? Generation Y, there's 80 million Americans who are considered millennials. And we keep throwing this word around, but anybody born between 1980 and 2000. Those years are a little bit flexible depending on who you ask, but these are the millennials. And this was the part of the project I was really, really interested in. We are the generation, I say we, I'm born smack dab in the middle of it, generation of Facebook, Twitter, social media. We have a strong desire to communicate, to make connections with everybody else around us, and to know what's kind of happening in the world around us. The question I asked all of these wonderful people is, how do we utilize these needs of the millennials for our own purposes as musicians? Did a little bit of research about the millennials and what it means to be a millennial, trends among our generation. We are apparently very narcissistic, though I don't know. We are very confident people. We are very self-expressive, we're upbeat, we're open to change. So why aren't they coming to a concert? If they are confident and expressive and open to new things, what is that barrier? Well, I kind of figured it out. I have a lot of friends at River Campus, partially from my classes from Miami Way and partially from Campus Times the rest of my life. So I asked them, when I first meet them, I'm like, oh, you know, what's your major? And they tell me, and they said, what's your major? And I said, oh, I'm an Eastman student, I'm studying voice. And I'm like, oh, you sing opera? Can you get a job with that? Like, is that a thing? And then I say, why don't you come to a concert? And they say, no, I don't want to do that, it's stuffy. There are old people, God forbid there are old people there. They're long, just sit in a nice theater. I mean, Eastman Theater is beautiful. You have to be quiet, and you don't get to have your phone for 2 whole hours. Why in the world would I want to do anything like that? So how do we adapt ourselves and fit this new generation that's coming in? Because we've learned from their characteristics. They're very, the culture itself and the generation itself kind of fits with classical music and what we do. So how do we get them here? We find ways to meet them on their level. We start them small, we reel them in. Sarah and I had a great conversation about group muse, starting them with very small groups, making it very social. They can get up, they can move around, they can drink, they can eat. So making it very comfortable for them and making that a smooth transition into coming to see the RPO. And hooking their interest in it, getting them excited about it, and making them want to come because they're truly, honestly interested in it.
It's a matter of making the technology invisible, and that having a clear idea about why you're using it, and it's a tool for telling some sort of story. And when you hear interviews with great film directors, they always say, we got the music, the actors, the staging, the lighting, the camera work, but any moment you look at the screen, you've got to know what the story's about.
I think we're very silly to not take advantage of technology and how that can reach out to people and encourage people to maybe have that experience at some point in their lives, the real one, or not. I mean, if people like their music digital, then that's fine too. I think Beethoven is great digital or live. Either way, it doesn't take away from how great the music is. And
Right.
so I think, if anything, musicians basically have a broader array of opportunities, and it seems to be broadening, daily, almost.
Myself, it's really important to play with younger people, and also for the faculty to be involved in projects that, again, have more current technology, so that it's not just left to you guys to do it. I mean it's.
And I think it would be cool to create some kind of performance that was totally tailored towards technology. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not even about a live concert. It somehow is, and not about a live concert being streamed or something like
Mm-hmm.
that, but an event that's completely just based on technology. Whether it's I don't even know what it would be. I haven't spent enough time thinking about it, but that would be totally fun. As long as it didn't take away from my time practicing to make sure I could still sit down and play a Beethoven quartet halfway decently.
Right.
So, but I think, I really do think that it's never the music. The music is fantastic. There's nothing wrong with Bach or Mozart or Beethoven. These guys are really good. I think I found people like images and they like other texts. So I do think there are other ways to present classical music which can bring out qualities in it. I think the real issue is really just one of finding venues, like situations to perform in that are different, and to once you change out of the normal conventional concert hall, and you don't need to wear a tux, and you don't need to do those things to sort of liberate yourself. But the catch is to not let the novelty be the purpose of doing it. I think if you just make some really cool music and you do it in an effective way, do it a few times, people will show up. So I think it's kind of, the sort of artistic part of it's the part that really, and therefore that's why you have to find a way that your artistic vision needs the technique.
To hear an acoustic instrument played live is still not the same as watching a YouTube video. It just isn't. It's not the same experience. It's not to say that watching, being able to transmit your performance on a YouTube video isn't important and can be meaningful to people, but I don't think it replaces actually hearing someone saw the wooden box.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And so there's something that's kind of beautifully unchanging about that too. And I hope that experience is still valued, and I sort of think it is, because at least amongst people for whom they get the opportunity, people who dare, or venture, I should say, who venture to come into a concert hall and hear it done, I think it's incredibly relevant still.
So Matt Brown was the guy propped up on the pillows. For those of you who don't know him, he injured his leg and was home for like 3 or 4 weeks and said, "Hey, come visit me at home." And I was like, "Oh, okay, sure." Fantastic guy. We talked for an hour and a half mostly about technology and how that influences the concert experience. He does all the operas, the comic book operas that have been happening in Eastman. They're fabulous. So the biggest thing that I talked about with everybody in all these interviews was that technology should be used. It's part of the culture. People love it. It's really engaging, but it shouldn't be overdone, and it shouldn't be the focus of the whole thing. It should supplement the music, and the music should still be the forerunner. And we shouldn't count on it to bring people in. I talked to Matt Brown about this, and I was like, is this bringing in the millennials? And he's like, not really. Like, that wasn't the point, and it's not. We don't see a direct trend between, we use technology, therefore we attract younger people. He's like, it's still the same kind of concert crowd that's coming in. So we can't count on it to bring in these young people. We have to find other ways to do it.
So I think things, like when you look at things on social media that people like, it's simple. It's simple. Like, how can you get your mission, how can you get what's important into like a few short, poignant points? So with advertising on Facebook, like, I don't think there's any need to post a huge like description of everything. I think one emotionally charged picture of a conductor with a short describer is sufficient.
I don't think we're going too far with it. I mean, I think it's nice. Like, for example, our new music director, Ward Stair, is a big Facebook guy. He's on Facebook all the time, talking about like what he's up to, what the orchestra's up to. Oh, the RPO has a new app. Isn't this really cool? Et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's really great. It's a different way to plug into the audience. So I think, any chance that we can do, any chance that we can make to actually try and connect with people. Whether it's through, Twitter, whether it's through Facebook, other social media, I think it's great.
Every market's unique, and so I don't think there's a blanket social media campaign. I've yet to see a successful social media campaign, and I guess the question is, what success? Is it people talking about it or people going? Social media, I think, can start the conversation, but does it get people to go? I don't know.
I mean, you hear about all kinds of things on the internet that you might get curious about. Food, seeing something, a building, I don't know, whatever it is. So for sure, why not music too?
I think the most important thing is not to have as a primary inspiration who's going to come. Mm-hmm. I think the most important thing is to do something you believe in. And I think we, as occasionally as a music school, and many of us as classical musicians, art musicians, however we choose to define ourselves, often limit ourselves in terms of what we're actually going to do creatively, and thus frankly limit our audience.
We've been running some ads on Facebook for certain targeted ads, and they've yet to sell a ticket. They get clicks, people look at them and click them, but they've yet to get people to move forward. You know, so I'm torn.
I don't think there's anything wrong with there at least being continuing to be part of an auditorium that's like a very traditional place where people can enjoy a concert. Your phone is off, it's in your pocket, you're not tweeting, you're not texting, you're there, you're not doing two things at once, you're doing one thing. You're listening to the concert, you've maybe read some program notes, whether it's on your phone or maybe it's something physically in your hands, whatever, and then you're just enjoying the experience in the moment. It's an unaccompanied event.
Mm-hmm.
But I also realize that it may be nice to have like an area of the hall where it's okay to be on your phone.
I'm torn because I look at it from 2 point of views. And I'm wrestling with it myself right now, and we're doing some experimenting on our end, because the bottom line for me is getting somebody to get their butt out of the chair and go to a concert. I'm finding social media doesn't get that. I find social media people talking and saying, "Oh, cool, Beethoven 5, that's great. Wish I could come."
I know a lot of musicians who are absolutely devoted to social media. I certainly use Facebook myself, Twitter, but again, in terms of sales, I can't really imagine that it would immediately translate. Again, it might depend upon where you are. I think in some larger communities, it might be possible to do an email blast, a Twitter blast, suggesting X, Y, and Z discounted concerts, if, in fact, you've got the followers. But the problem is that if most of the folks who sit in your hall are over 60, they may not be using those things much. So it's hard to tell.
A lot, because I mean, people check Facebook like 5 times a day, at least.
I do think it's more effective than posters, and I do think it's more effective than the ads we put in the city. I mean, we put them in because I think when we went to the communications department, that's what they're used to doing.
I don't think group music could be as successful, or anything these days that engages people in our generation could be as successful without all those things, because people don't write it on their agenda. They just like see it on Facebook and it reminds you in the morning there's this event today, or people, things show up in their newsfeed, or like they check their friends' Instagrams.
And the other thing that's interesting is with a concert, and this is where it's one of the few times that we can go in, shut off our electronic world, and get down to the soul and heart of what we are as humans.
One of the other big questions that I asked people during the interviews is, social media is a hot topic. What are you doing about it? And I happened to be on spring break last week, and the ALP program hosted Audrey, who did her master's thesis on orchestras and social media. Yes, ALP. So I went, and she was absolutely fantastic, and she did a study incorporating, she contacted every major orchestra in the country and received like 30% response rate, which is really, really good, and she got some really great statistics. She said 93% of orchestras have Facebook pages. This was in 2013, so fairly recently. 50% have Twitter, 50% have YouTube, and it tends to be the mid-sized to the small orchestras that use it because it's free. They don't have to pay for it. It's free marketing for them. And then she said, who is using social media? She said the biggest growth right now in Facebook is the 70-plus crowd, which I was like, really? They're using Facebook, but it is. The millennials tend to be backing away from Facebook because it's not really so cool anymore, and I've definitely seen that among people that I know. And the older people are finally catching on, and they're getting on Facebook. But the orchestras are really aiming to attract the 25 to 39-year-olds and the 39 to 46-year-olds. Those are like goal audiences. And 74% of adults online are using social media. So it is a way to connect with these people. It has to be used in a very specific way, in a targeted way, as Bridget was talking about, as Keith was saying, but it is a way to connect with people. And millennials still are the generation who uses social media most often. This was a study done by the Pew Center, I believe, and this is people using social media. So like I said, it's a tool, it has to be used effectively. You can't just blast Facebook and hope people are going to come. You can't overdo it because people get really tired of it and they'll just kind of start ignoring you. Make it simple, you know, like Bridget said, a beautiful picture, a little caption. People will click on it, people will explore a little bit. And finding ways to use it effectively. I'm really curious to do more research about ways to use social media very effectively, to talk to Audrey more. I have so many questions I'd love to ask her about this. So, to brighten your spirits, now I've talked about this, there we go, about, you know, decline of orchestras and how much work we have to do as musicians. I thought a little clip about the value of music and what we do would be a nice way to kind of conclude everything.
So it's valuing music as opposed to turning it into an entertainment enterprise. The industry itself has been going into the flashier, glitzier multimedia with the hopes that, well, kids like to play video games, so they're going to want to come and see video games with an orchestra. Or, you know, let's play West Side Story with the movie. Or you know, these are great one-time things, but the problem is you need staying power.
I think particularly if dynamic programs are presented with excitement and there is a sense of sharing something, that we, the performers, have a bond with you through the music, through our performances. You just haven't heard it yet until we do this.
Because music is a communicative art that is one of the few things that can touch the soul. When 9/11 happened, the first thing people reached for was music. When tragedy happens, they reach for music. When weddings happen, they reach for music. When joy happens, they reach for music. Opening ceremonies of the Olympics would be very hard without music. And so it's a medium that touches the human. And I think it's still, from the Beethoven, it's still going to touch people. And I think that's what we need to, as musicians, make sure is that we're communicating with the audience.
For me, it's very simple. You put on a very good concert, very well played, excitingly played, because it has to be well played and exciting, and well played, and people will take notice.
I don't think millennials will start coming to the RPO just because they advertise on Facebook. We need to show them the reason why it's good for them to come. It's like you'll experience some really cool stuff that will make you experience things that you couldn't experience at other places.
I don't have a negative outlook on it at all. I think that everything's going to be fine. I think a lot of people are worrying about nothing, honestly.
It's time for us, well, we need to think of art as life. Art is life. It's not something that you hang on a wall or that you keep in a glass box. It's life. It's made of human experience, and it's for everyone. It belongs to everyone. It's like humanity's patrimony. So it's is for all of us. It belongs to all of us. So we just need to share it to live more fully.
That was a nice way to end the whole thing. So back to the question, should we be worried? And my final word is that it depends on who you ask. And if you ask me, I think we have a really positive outlook if we continue to work. So what is being done? Because one of the things I would have loved to share with you if we had 3 more hours to be together, without putting you all to sleep, would be all these people I asked, and I said, what are you doing for projects? What are you working on? And they're working on a huge variety of things, from group muse, which you heard about, to the comic book operas, to things with Fringe Festival. Bridget's working on a program with Bach cello suites and dancers, and it's going to be so cool. All these people are doing all these amazing things. It's like I said, group muse. Salon 97 is happening out west. I read a whole article about that. There's festivals happening. Orchestras are doing things. There's music education programs that are happening. There's people who just like, I have this great idea, I'm going to do this. And if they have the resources, they do it. And it's really exciting. And there are so many things that I haven't heard about yet that are happening. So there's all this energy, and there's people who are doing things about this. So that's why I'm really happy and positive about it. Classical music is dying. We started there, and I strongly disagree. It is changing, and that's what really needs to happen. We need to adapt to this culture that we're living in, to this generation that's coming up, and finding ways to connect with them and bring them to the stuff that we love so much. So that's all I have. I'm happy to take questions, comments, thoughts. I've given you a lot of information, and I would love to hear what you have to say about it.
Funny, Rachel, one of the things I really liked about this was that, all these people work here, right? And you talked about community a lot. It's sort of like to put all these people in a conversation together in this room here that doesn't usually happen because, as Mark says, we're always running, to other things. It was really nice to actually, it's just a comment, it's not a question, but it's really nice to have them all talk to each other and to us, as you will, through your work. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it was a pleasure talking to all of them. I mean, just having the opportunity and the, excuse to sit them down for an hour and just pick their brain about all these things, which is so exciting. And a lot of them I'd met for the first time. I'd never met Will. I think I'd never met 90% of them. I'd met Professor Kellogg before, and obviously Professor Vandermark. But the rest of them I've never met before. And it's all these people I hear about. Matt Brown. I'd heard all the things about Matt Brown, and I got him for an hour and a half sitting on his couch. And it was the coolest thing. I was so excited.
Probably could have gotten Matthew for 3 days. He's not moving from the.
Poor guy.
The best comment is he's sitting on the couch under a blanket saying, "I don't want to get in a tux." And I was just thinking, no, you definitely look like you could right now. It's so funny. Even having Keith Elder for an hour was pretty incredible. Just to pick his brain about all this stuff was really exciting. I had a great time.
Another observation, and you've sort of drawn it anyway, but one of the things I think you've hinted at is that by suggesting Group Muse Studio 97, the community touchstone of what some of us hope an interested audience will aspire to will no longer be the symphony orchestra. And I think that it might be, but it might not be. There are options, and I think many of us see that that's going to be an important change to continue, not for our sakes necessarily, but basically just to have, for people in general, people who love music, people who want to create music now, it's a creative outlet, and it's not necessarily linked to any specific institution. They're all going to change.
Yeah. One of the things Sarah Hill and I talked about with Group Muse is how, it's great and it brings chamber music, and I talked to David Dean about that as well, that chamber music is so portable. Rowan and I talked about it too, that it's just, it can go anywhere, and we bring it all these different places, but there's nothing like sitting in a place like Eastman Theater and hearing, Mahler 2 with a huge orchestra, or hearing, a a Beethoven symphony with a huge orchestra, that sensation can't be replicated by a chamber group. So I
I
guess.
disagree.
Really?
Absolutely. I think that the joy of hearing a spectacular piano trio 5 feet away from you can be as overwhelming and far more personal than being in the nosebleed seats of the Eastman Theater and seeing Mahler 2, which I dearly love, or Mahler 1, and you chose the right movement. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
but it's, the experience varies, and it also depends upon what what the repertoire is and everything.
Depends on
But the
person and
proximity of
background
chamber
and
music is so, I mean, I've always found that so intense.
And I actually don't know whether, when you say there's nothing like sitting in the theater and listening to Mahler, it can be a horrendous experience for people who have no access to that music, and that's very easy. And I don't think it was different 100 years ago. I think the people in Vienna in 1910 were challenged as well by sitting an hour and a half, actually, because it is challenging and it's demanding, and unschooled ears and butts that can sit that long. It's not very easy, actually.
Yeah.
So I don't know that will ever change. So I agree, actually. I don't think that group music is actually a way to bring people to the orchestra concerts. I think it's the goal in itself, actually. That's what really happens, actually.
Yeah, I think I'd never heard of it, programs like that before this project, and I just can imagine people in a living room sitting and experiencing this music for the first time, what that must feel like for them. Versus, dragging 2 people who never heard classical music to an RPO concert and making them sit there for 2 hours. I completely agree with you. That experience, that personal connection, that I can't even describe it, overwhelming sensation of hearing that music and I guess understanding it is, yeah, I agree.
Well, Salons were, historically, the way music was presented. It wasn't small, it wasn't houses, it was chambers, it was education of I talk to the musicians and I understand why the music is, because the composer was sitting there playing it.
And you could talk to them,
Right.
like, hey, what were you thinking about, the second movement? And, oh, this is
part of the
movement, and it's like,
movement seemed odd.
oh, that makes so much sense, and now I want to come back and hear more because I understand. Versus, again, dragging them in and making them sit there for 2 hours without, I guess, background understanding.
Well, I think too, Carnegie Hall's been doing this series for a while, where they bring in a guest artist, performer, whatever, and present a series of concerts based on that artist's interests, and involve the audience in the concert, in the discussion of what the music is about, why this person has chosen this music, what do they think about it. So they're really doing a lot of that kind of outreach, one-on-one with the larger audience, but still one-on-one, and getting them to invest in the process of hearing the music. So it's,
And they'll make them come back. If they're
Right.
invested and they feel the connection to that person, they're going to come back and hear more. Thank you all so much for coming. Yeah.
Oh, well, we're not done now.
No,
just getting warmed up here.
Well, one thing I'm curious about is I have limited experience concert going in Europe, but the experiences I have had have been interesting and eye-opening because they seem to have. Have you done any comparative research? They don't seem to have the same bringing the audience problem. At least at the concert events that I've been to, there seems to be a much broader spectrum of the generations mixing together. It looked more like a big Greek or Jewish wedding, rather than an RPO concert. That's one question. And another is I heard on NPR this morning that there was a wave of there's a kind of festival wave going on in the country. We see it in Rochester, which is festival crazy. And the reporter was talking about how there was a natural outgrowth that we're living in a digital age where there was kind of a craving for actual, gathering together in ways that perhaps we don't do so often in, say, churches or temples or other kinds of community gatherings that used to be more common are becoming less rare. We see that the Christian Science Church on East Avenue just being taken over by their so I wonder. So I just kind of wonder if there's a possibility, there's a way for classical music to tap into that festival craze. And the craving for forms of community that might replace some older backgrounds.
First question. I stumbled upon some little bits and pieces. I haven't extensively researched what it's like in Europe versus here. I know from my own experience being in Europe and living with, a family in Italy for a month and just talking to them about just having dinner conversations. I guess it's much more of it's very much more part of their culture. It's a very normal thing for everybody to go to the concerts and no?
It's a total fantasy, I'm sorry to say. I mean, to me, it's not true. It's not a class thing just as it is here. I mean, in Germany, if you talk to people in Berlin, is there classical music crisis? No, because it's Berlin. Is there classical music crisis in New York? I don't think so, But if you go to the smaller cities, yes. Why don't they talk about it as much? Because the government subsidizes the orchestras. And it's a fairly different funding situation. But is there more interest in young people going to classical music concerts?
No.
No.
The family I lived with was older.
Yeah.
So that makes
And
sense.
again, if they're well educated and
Yes.
up near the class, that's a whole different story.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm very curious about that though.
I did have some fantasy experiences because I went to a concert in Barcelona when I was by far the oldest person.
Barcelona, Berlin, New York City, those cities, no problem. No problem at all. They also have many tourist cities, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
these were
festival cities.
And festival cities, right?
Yeah.
These were people speaking Catalan. They were not tourists. I was one of the. We were two of the few tourists at this.
I'm very curious about that though. The smaller orchestras in Europe and how they're doing. Because you're right, it's government subsidized, so they're not really as afraid and scared about it as we are. Second question, I think it'd be great to have more festivals, but I think the Fringe Fest, which has come to Rochester in the last couple of years, and I've seen kind of the growth of it, has had some classical music experiences in it. And I like the way that it's kind of slowly working itself into it, but it's not a classically driven festival. There's all these different pieces. And one of the chunks that I had to cut out for time was about collaborations with other artists, and taking classical music and exploring ways to use it with visual art and exploring ways to use it with movement. And I guess using it as a way to introduce people to classical music who had never seen it before, but they're a dancer and they're interested in movement and dance, so they're going to come see this, and there's a Bach cello suite happening at the same time, and now they're like, that's interesting music. Just finding ways to kind of bring those mediums together, because we are artists, and we all are very emotional and people who are interested in this kind of stuff. So finding ways to bring that together as a community, I think, is really interesting. I think I'd be hesitant to just have a huge classical music concert, just classical music, and labeling it as such. I feel like that there would have to be a way to, reach the people that wouldn't normally come to these concerts. It would be like having, 5 RPO concerts in a weekend, and you'd have the same people coming over and over and over again. You'd have to find different ways to approach this thing we call classical music and ways to interest all sorts of people. That's why the Fringe Fest is so successful, is because it has a million different events that are happening in the 2 weeks that they have it, and so many people are interested in one piece of it, and then they see something else, and they're going to go to this as well. So if we were just to have a classical music festival, it would have to have many different angles and approaches and integrating different pieces of art to bring bigger audiences and to make it successful, if that makes sense.
Another thing that strikes me is, you go to an RPO concert and you see 2,000 people seated and taking in a Mahler symphony. And if you compare that to other art forms, where do you get 2,000 people visiting a museum at the same time, or reading The Sound and Fury simultaneously, or seeing a challenging movie at the Little or at the Dryden? You'll see a great movie that attracts 20 people. So it's really something. It's kind of miraculous that you would get such a large group of people together to
Yeah.
I mean, it's something not to be taken for granted, but it's something of a miracle, I think.
Right. But I'm also wondering when the last time was that the RPO had 2,000 people, I guess, come to the concert. And when I was talking to Keith, he said that recently, it was like the week before, they had their Beethoven concert, and that was the first time they had sold out in a long time. But it's Beethoven.
Right.
Name, here you go, everybody knows who that is, and they're all going to come for that. But I agree, I mean, bringing that many people together is really miraculous, and experiencing that with so many of your, 2,000 of your closest friends is incredible. But again, it's a different experience than experiencing, your first chamber piece, sitting on somebody's living room floor and having a musician right there in your face, and knowing the musician because you just had a drink with them and you had a 20-minute conversation. So different experiences, both can be equally riveting, I think.
But it goes back to what the young woman said in your documentary, where it's like, it needs to be a social experience. They're not standing there Instagramming it and saying like, oh my goodness, or sharing that 2,000 person experience. And there's not an opportunity the way we currently do classical music in orchestral settings. You don't have that interaction with the person sitting next to you per se, and have that standing around, hanging out, talking about it. You absorb it, but then you take it and internalize it. It's not.
There are places where they do that. The World Symphony's doing that, for instance.
Yeah,
right?
there's a whole study done about that too. More things I would have loved to share with you. But yeah, they've been doing a lot of focusing on that kind of stuff, and they've been very, very successful with it, from everything that I read.
Berlinfield, midnight concerts.
Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Or
There's lots
if
of
you
stuff.
haven't seen the Basil Twist, Rite of Spring, that was done the St. Luke's Chamber Orchestra, but it's then the design and the visuals trump everything. But it's just another way of doing it. But it is on a grand scale, but it's a completely different way of imagining somebody who probably doesn't draw 2,000 people at the RPO, but that is, Stravinsky and Rite of Spring. But under the right circumstances, or different circumstances, mind-blowing circumstances, using technology, really using technology, all sorts of things can happen. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.